All right. Hello, lovelies, and welcome to LitCon Lounge. No, we're not doing LitCon Lounge. I was just kidding. LitCon 2021. This is the Magic Myths and Monsters panel, and we're here to talk about some of our favorite magic myths and monsters. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Heidi Angell, and I am one of the volunteers here at LitCon helping bring all of these amazing authors to light and share all the exciting things that we've got going on. And before we get started, I'll go ahead and let everybody else introduce themselves. Rebecca, let's start with you.
My name's Becca FLynn, and I write urban paranormal fantasy that pretty much focuses on myths and monsters and weird creatures.
All right, and Stephen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Stephe B Pearl. The B makes it easy to find me on the internet. And I write Norse fantasy Viking adventures. And I also write urban fantasy. And I utilize actual mythical creatures in both. And I've also studied the art magique, metaphysics for a very long time, and I try to incorporate actual traditions from the Western esoteric tradition into my work.
That is awesome. And that kind of brings us right into our first topic, which is what are some of your favorite magic systems? And Stephen, go ahead and answer that for us.
Western esoteric system. Combination of alchemy, ancient pagan practices, the idea of archetypes and archetypal rays that has been adopted largely by the New Age in a watered down kind of way. So that's my favorite.
Awesome. And Rebecca, what is your favorite?
As far as systems go, I don't know if there's really a favorite that I have. I just like the use of magic in general. I like the whole system where it's ancient, long ago. It's been passed through the ages, and that whole idea that it's a lost art, now because technology and science have kind of taken over. So people forget that, and there's so few people left that still embrace it. So that ancient feeling, I really enjoy that.
Awesome.
If I might riff on that for a moment.
Yeah,
in Babylon 5, they had the techno mages who simulated the effects of magic through using technology, but also the sort of applied psychology that is part of magic. So yes. I thought that was a nice kind.
And I was actually going to say that's my favorite magic system that is a combination of magic and science. It's we know this works. We don't necessarily know why, and we don't care because it works, but we know this works because of this, and that. Yep. And, blending of magic and science is always one of my favorites. So I like those when they pop up.
You kind of look at chaos theory in science. They're finally catching up to what the mystics have said for years, that the system is too complex to model when you're looking at the real world. So it's all the minor little tweaks that can be done. Right.
And I like that, it doesn't have to be God or science. It doesn't have to be magic or science. It can be both. And I'm totally cool with that. And I love that. To me, that mirrors the real world. And so when I find systems that embrace that in storytelling, especially, I really enjoy those. All right. And then the next question that we had is, tell us a little bit about your favorite monster. And we're going to start with Stephen on this one.
Okay. I am going to mangle pronunciation on this. But the Dragar, they are from Norse mythology, and they are the undead servants of the goddess Hel. And they move around Midgard performing her will. And they basically They cannot deny her anything. They will do whatever they're told. Within that parameter, they basically behave like people and have their own moral and free will only within obeying those orders. They look like somebody burnt a corpse and painted it blue. And they're unstoppable. So they're really a kind of deep creature.
Right. A lot better than zombies, right?
Oh, yeah. They got a brain.
Yeah, that too. That too. All right. And Rebecca, what's your favorite?
I have a lot that I really like, but I think my favorite is probably the Kelpie. And I like that one. It's from Celtic mythology, and it can take the form of a horse, but it looks a little wonky. Like the hooves are backwards and things like that, and they're kind of shimmery, almost like they're always wet. They are a water creature, but when you go near it and you touch it, you're stuck to it now. You cannot release yourself. The more you struggle, the more you're stuck. And the only way, according to mythology, the only way to release yourself is to take the name of Jesus Christ. And as soon as you say it, you're released. Because, Celtic is very strong in their religious beliefs as well. So in order to release yourself, you have to say Jesus Christ. And I just found it very interesting. But once they have you, they drag you down into the water, and the only thing that's left of you is your heart. So they eat everything but the heart. So I just find them to be very, very intriguing. And by the way, the reason that I know so much about them is hint, 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 hint. I've researched them for a reason.
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Yeah, I love that. That is awesome. So I'm going to be that horrible person and say that my favorite monster is people, because even the worst creatures out there in our stories don't even begin to match the horrible things that humans can and will do to each other. So I actually did, for the Hunted series, I had a whole part of the blog hops that was focusing on the real people who created the mythologies behind things like vampires and werewolves, and that it was people that were doing such horrible, heinous things that the people around them figured it had to be a monster because a human couldn't do that. But they were wrong. You're such lovely monsters.
I'm just going to do it because I have to. In the third book of my Chronicles of Ray McAndrews series, which is currently in editorial with the publisher, I both have a Kelpie, and it's based on a werewolf who's actually a possessed form by a very evil person. So
that is awesome. So what you're saying is
so
that I need to be paying attention over the next year for when your stuff releases, right? Yes, I love that. That is awesome. And that's the fun with urban fantasy, that fantasy is kind of breaking out of its norms and getting away from the whole Renaissance pieces and starting to explore other mythologies to adapt and adjust to. But that's one of the things that I love about urban fantasy is that we pull from different mythologies and blend them all together, and that makes it so much fun, because you get to have common monsters like kelpies and werewolves, but then you also get to have some that are less commonly known, like I think it's pronounced shigeru from Japan. And there's so many different cultures that you can pull from and get away with it more in urban fantasy than you can in fantasy. So, and also I really love monsters. I'm not gonna lie, I have a small obsession.
Me too. I understand.
Oh, they're fun.
They are. I sometimes I find myself rooting for the monsters, not the heroes, because monsters are they're just being themselves. They're not. It's not good or evil. It's just, it is. Dragons eat people. It's not personal. It's just food. But yeah, they give us a nice thing to come up against and try and figure out how to adapt and change. And honestly, is the story as good without the monster?
No.
Yeah.
You need an antagonist. Also, I like your thing about they just are. I wrote a short a while back, Better the Devil You Know. And one of the lead characters is a succubus. And she's an absolute hoot because she's just going through being a succubus. And it's, yeah, I eat people's emotional nature. That's all I do. But, I went out and that rapist isn't going to rape again. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had a series that I was playing with where before everybody else started doing it, so I shelved it. But I had a series that was about a vampire society that part of the way that they survived was that they got rid of people that nobody would care about, but they also created like this moral code behind, what's a bad person and what are the people that we're allowed to get rid of. And they kind of became like vigilantes, not just, but at the same time, at the end of the day, when they were really hungry, yes, they tried really hard to only feed on the worst of the worst, but sometimes you just got to stop at McDonald's because you're starving, And
yeah.
so they slipped sometimes, but yeah, it's fun when you get to play with the idea of the monster's emotions and feelings too behind it, for sure. All right, and then what is your favorite myth? And I'll let either one of you start, whoever's got an answer ready, because I don't.
So many, so many. I think I'll fall back on the Battle of Ra, Bast, and Apep in the Egyptian system, where Ra and Bast band together to fight the Serpent of Chaos and end up casting him down so that the new day can be born. I think if I have to go with one favorite, that's it.
That one is really good, especially I can't think of the name of the YouTube series, but there's a series that talks about Christ archetypes throughout different mythologies. And
Oh,
that's
yeah.
one of the examples that they use as a Christ archetype is that battle there and Ra being like Christ and putting down Satan. So that was a
Yeah,
fun.
well, the Christians borrowed the Jews borrowed a hell of a lot from Egyptian, and then the Christians borrowed from the Jews.
Yeah. And I think that's something that, every culture, as you see them come into contact with each other, they do the same things, and it's really fun to see how there's so much once the spice trades started happening and the Eastern culture and how the mythologies before that in both sides, there weren't, some common creatures. And then suddenly there were attributes of this creature that got adapted to this creature who was kind of similar, but a different creature. And then, they just start to blend together and become more similar. We all trade on each other's culture.
Yeah.
It's been a thing forever, right?
Yep, I agree.
And Rebecca, what would you say is your favorite myth?
I think probably one of my favorites is mermaids in general. People romanticize these things same way they romanticize vampires, and I love that they just get it wrong every time. The myth of the mermaid. I mean, these are female creatures that lure men to their deaths, and you're sitting there going, "Oh, they're so beautiful, and I want to be a mermaid." And it's just it's just funny to me that people just get it so wrong, you know.
Mhm.
And by the way, I think it's funny that you actually mentioned Egyptian, because my third book is Egyptian, and Ra is totally in it. I just found that funny because you were talking about the rising of the sun and everything, and I actually used that in the story, so
Oh,
Oh, that's
cool.
that just kind of
awesome.
amused me.
Yeah,
I was
I
like,
feel like
I
you
know
can't really
that.
do Egypt without Ra, right? I mean,
Yeah,
even like Royden kind of tried to give
hmm
him a backseat because he is such a huge character that it's kind of lazy. But at the same time, you just can't not have him because
hmm
he's kind of the focal point of
yeah. It's like,
Egyptian
you know,
mythos,
w- can't do it without Zeus. Can't do it without
right?
Odin. I mean, these are it's the head of the pantheon. You can't do it without them.
Right, right. Yeah, it's the same idea. Absolutely. So, with that being said, when we are looking at writing these stories that borrow from other myths,
hmm
how much do you change and tweak and twist, and how much do you try to remain true to the culture that you're borrowing their mythos from? And
My own,
Stephen, I'm going to point at you because I remember you talking about this a couple years ago, and I thought it was really good.
yeah, my own personal rule is I stay true to the personality and the morals of the deity, of the being in the myth, and I may riff around it a little bit. Um, there's a great cartoon out. It's the Greco-Roman gods in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and it's on YouTube. I can't remember the name of it for the life of me, but he did it excellently because he had he plays fast and loose with the mythology, the actual stories, but the archetypal forms that he incorporates. You know, Zeus is the high school football player jock
Mm-hmm.
who has a dozen girlfriends. And then he has Hades, who's kind of the somewhat shy in the background, but perfect, completely faithful to Persephone once she becomes his girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And he just goes like that. So while he plays fast and loose with the actual stories, the archetypes remain true. And they have the moral compass that they actually have in the myth, which is a major thing for me, that moral compass be consistent. I hate Disney's version of hate. I mean, they Christianized that and they made him the
So
devil.
hard.
And
And
he's
while I
not
love
that.
him, I agree he's nothing like Hades.
No,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
yeah. Jim Butcher did an excellent depiction of Hades in his
Mm-hmm.
Harry Dresden Wizard for Hire series.
I love Jim.
Brilliant. I'm sorry?
I love Jim Butcher.
Oh, yeah. Nice
I
guy,
think
too.
we all do, right? I don't know that many people read urban fantasy and don't love Jim Butcher. He's kind of the one that
Gotta
made
love
it
him.
mainstream, right?
hmm
All right. So how about you, Rebecca? How much do you play with the stories and myths that you borrow from?
It kind of depends on what it is and how much I can actually find about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do extensive amounts of research before I include something in there because I want to make sure that I'm actually doing that creature justice. Um, if I'm going to take the time to find these obscure creatures, which is ultimately what I do in those books, I want to make sure that when they get brought to the forefront, that people know the history of them. When it comes to the uh, the gods and things like that, um, physically I try to keep them the same because if you were to go look up an image of Cernunnos, you've got the horns, you've got the vines, you've got all that stuff. I want to keep that as close to it as possible, but there's not as much that's said about like what he was talking about, personality and stuff. So I kind of have to build that myself. So if there's not a lot there, there's a lot that I have to build on it. But
Mm-hmm.
when there's more that's available to me, I like to keep it as much like it as possible because, like I said, I want the people to see this is what is from mythology.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that people tend to ignore because it's not as popular as a werewolf or as a vampire or whatever. And
Right.
I'd like to keep it as closely related to it as possible.
That is awesome. I have to be honest, I kind of avoid writing about specific people and characters that have been done before because I don't want to do that twisting and get people upset, because I do think that it's important to honor those archetypes. But I do get a kick out of reading others who take it and they acknowledge it, but then they twist it, and it's like sometimes it's because they've grown, and sometimes it's because this was just how they were perceived because they were worshipped. I really enjoyed Rick Riordan's twisting of the gods a bit, and they were their archetype, but then they were also, there was more to them than just that stereotype, basically. And I thought that was fun to get those little nuances of, not only is Venus the goddess of love, but she's also kind of vapid and a little bit annoying, and she doesn't recognize that love is more than just flowers and chocolates and all that fun stuff, that there's work that goes into it too. But then you go, oh, well, maybe she does know that. She just doesn't like that part of it. And then you're like, okay, it gives her more depth than she had reading the Greek stories. So
Yes.
Yeah.
No. Marry me because I work late.
Right.
You got to feel for Hephaestus, but he got himself into it.
Yeah, well, he didn't entirely have a choice. They were kind of match made. They didn't choose each other so much, right? Well, I guess it depends on which story you follow and how much of it's from the Greek and how much of it's from the Roman. But yeah, that was always a fun. Also, talk about the ultimate incel story, right? I am absolutely not attractive, but I expect the most beautiful person to be in love with me. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like the rich man who can buy the beautiful young woman jewelry and clothing and so forth. And there's always been a class of beautiful young women who basically, they're in it for the money. Yeah. And there are beautiful young men who are exactly the same. So it's not a sexist.
They figured it out too. Yep. It is definitely a human quality for sure. Thank you. Sorry, my husband is delivering coffee, the elixir of life. All right.
I don't drink coffee then.
Oh, I was just
bad, Becca.
That was my cat. He's like, Dad, why can't I be in here? All right. So, is there a monster, myth, or magic system that you would like to twist? Or that you have twisted and you'd like to tell us about?
I like the idea of the talismans, the protective talismans. And, people wear them. It's meant to protect them from this kind of magic or that kind of creature or whatever it is. But what if that talisman is meant to protect other people from you? And you being the person that's wearing it, you're something, and whatever this is protecting other people from you. And I actually have used that. I won't tell you what it is though, because it's something that's kind of coming later, but I have used it. And I like the idea that it's almost like your own personal prison, but you don't even know it. You don't even know that it's a prison at that point, because you're sitting there thinking, oh, okay, well, it's protecting me, I'm good, but it's really not.
Right.
That hidden story kind of thing.
Well, in the Chronicles of Ray McAndrews, book 1, Nuki Kubai, I take classic monsters, but as I have my lead character say, people like their myths gory and simple. And what I do with that is, so because of this, in the mythology, they've taken things that are strictly spiritual manifestations and given them physical manifestation. So with the Nuki Kubai, they separate their heads from their bodies, fly around, and scare people to death to feed on the energies released.
Mhm.
Well, I have that happening, only it's a form of astral projection. And what they have done is spiritually separated the head from the body so that the chakras from the neck down are not factoring in, meaning that you only have the top two chakra empowering this spiritual manifestation. So we have logic without a moral center and completely self-serving. And this
Oh.
is how I do the Nuki Kubai. So I shift physical manifestation into spiritual, and then I make Ray's powers mostly spiritual. His effect on the physical world is very limited, but on the spiritual world, he's hell on wheels.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I do the same thing with a revenant in the second book, and with the werewolf in the third book, I have the spirit of the practitioner going out and possessing dogs and causing the dogs to attack people. And that's how I like to play with it and riff on the myth. I like to do that shift to make it so people walk away going, could that happen? I hope not.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the most fun part of writing urban fantasy is seeing how much you can tie into the unexplainable that happens in our world every single day. And yeah, I enjoy playing with the stereotypes of creatures and then showing creatures that don't fit the stereotype. I also think it's a good example of what we do as humans naturally. Oh, this group of people and these types of people are all like this. But then there are those that aren't necessarily like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of play with that with the hunters. The two main characters have been hunting for a very long time. And they are teaching this group of kids, young adults, how to defend themselves against the vampires that are infecting their town. And they're kind of giving them a rundown on what these creatures are. And they're like, yes, they look like the person that you loved and they sound like the person that you loved, but they are basically a shark. And they'll use the fact that they look and sound like the person that you love to gain your trust so that they can feed, because that's all they care about is feeding, and they have no control. And that's a pretty common storyline. But then there's an incident that happens with one of the characters' fathers who was turned. And when they find him, he's living with a whole bunch of other vampires. He's feeding, he's a monster, he's horrible. But then he begs them to take care of his daughter because he knows that his daughter's with them before he dies. And he knows he's going to die. And is it a ploy to try and stop them from killing him? Or is there a part of them that is still human? So I kind of play with that. And I think part of what drives that is, when you sit down and you look at the interviews with serial killers who monsters are based off of, some of them, it's easy to say, oh, they're just evil. But then when you sit down and you listen to their stories and their experiences, and it's very uncomfortable how easy it is to actually understand how they ended up the way that they were. What they went through that shaped how they view the world, that made them think that it was okay to do this thing. And that's really scary. It doesn't work for the dichotomous world that everybody wants to be in. But that's how people are in general. None of us are completely wholly the buckets and stereotypes that we try to fit ourselves into.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always fun to play with in a safe space where we're talking about monsters, not race or politics or religions. And that's what I like to play with, is tying those elements in there. So, okay. And then what is one monster, myth, or magic system that you feel is overplayed and you wish people would just leave it alone already?
Vampires. No offense, but overdone and done poorly.
Yep. Rebecca, are you thinking the same thing?
No, but I've got one
Okay.
that's
I was going to say, while I do have the series that is about vampires, I completely agree with you.
Mhm.
I am playing with other mythologies because I'm just like, I'm so, when I wrote it, it was a clap back to the trend that vampires were supposed to be kissed. And I was like, nope, vampires are monsters. You need to get back to. And then I was just like, oh my gosh, if I read another tortured vampire story, I'm gonna go explore other things. And then as I kept exploring other things, it's like, oh, everybody else is doing the werewolf thing too now. Dang it.
yeah.
Oh, now everybody else is doing the gins and the okay, so now I'm gonna go hop over to Japan and see what I can borrow from Japan. Nope, everybody else is doing that too. Man, I just need to walk away. I've been taking a break from that series for a reason.
Go obscure.
There's enough weird stuff in Japanese myth that you could fill a universe with it.
I need to dig deep and get creative and not stick with the easy ones that come from anime. That was my problem is I was like, oh, this is fun. I'm watching anime with my kid. And I'm like, oh, I'll bring this element into it. And then I'm like seeing it across everything. I'm like, okay, I need to get a little bit further ahead of the zeitgeist because it takes longer to write a book than, yeah, that's it. But yeah, I totally agree. Vampires are well overdone. I agree. And what one would you say, Rebecca?
I've actually got two. One of them is the cliche connection between people and their abilities or their powers or whatever. Like, why does a Native American have to be? I can speak to the animals. Why? Why does a woman always have to be? She's got feline abilities. A male always has canine abilities. Why? Go with something different, for crying out loud. And the other one is zombies. Stop calling it a zombie if you didn't raise it from the dead. It's not a zombie, okay? Zombies are creatures that have been raised from the dead. That's it, okay? They're not medically induced or whatever.
You don't like the infection stories?
No, I'm so sick of it. I'm so tired of it.
That is a trend that is
so awful.
Well worn.
It really, they're everywhere. All the time. That's all I see. And it's never real zombies. Okay. Give me a Shaun of the Dead. Okay. And I'll be happy. That's a zombie. It's just like walking around and eating brains and stuff. But even then, it's not the same as what the original zombies were. The original zombies are necromancer raises them from the dead to do their bidding, and then when the bidding is done, they're dismissed. But it's just there's so many that have been done that they just call it that because of what they look like and how they walk and this and that, and there's so few that have actually stuck to that. And that's why, like I said, when I write things and I pull it from mythology and I pull it from legends, I try to stick to it as much as possible because that's what it is. Why would I pull out, a phoenix and say, oh, it's made of water? No, that's not what a phoenix is. Phoenix is a firebird, so that's big
Mine kind of fits along the same line. I'm very over the whole monsters into lovers thing. Not only because there's so much about it that as a feminist, I'm like, that's a toxic relationship. And I struggle with romance anyway, because a lot of times it's like, you shouldn't be teaching people that this is what love is. But I guess love is different for everybody, and my version of love doesn't have to be the same as everybody else's. But there's often this whole toxic relationship that is codependent and really unhealthy, and that kind of freaks me out. But also just, it was fine when because vampires are immortal, but they're kind of a perfect example of immortality, depending on which myth you pull from. And it wasn't horrible with wolves because, dogs are pretty. And I can see, we love dogs. Dogs have a great personality. Okay. But then they went with zombies. And I'm sorry, you cannot convince me that any human would ever fall in love with something that is rotting and especially guided girl. That was just weird. I was like, there's no girl in the world that would be like, yes, your face is falling off and you smell like something that's been dead for the last 3 years, but I totally want you to kiss me with that mouth.
Thank you. Exactly.
No, there's not a girl on the planet that would go that way. It's just not gonna happen. And then they just keep getting weirder, and I am struggling with the level of weirdness to trying to make monsters romantic partnerships. I just can't keep doing that.
If I can riff on that for a second,
Yeah.
in Worlds Apart, I have my wizard character who goes on a complete rant about how his ex-girlfriend, his ex-fiance, left him to become a walking corpse, and then came back and thought that she could turn him into an entree. And you know what they're like, sex and feeding all tied up together, and I don't share. And I thought that was a nice riff on, you're looking at the reality that this would impose. On top of that, he's just a very straightforward type of person. So
yeah. I love that. All righty. And then we're kind of getting towards the end here. But let's take a minute and tell everybody a little bit about the books that you have out there and where they can find them. And we'll go ahead and let Rebecca start.
Okay. So far, I've got 2 books in the trilogy. The Pandora Chronicles is the trilogy. The first one is called The Wild Hunted. The second one is Iron Will. The Wild Hunted is based around Celtic mythology, and Iron Will is Greek. And it's a lot of, like I said, obscure creatures that don't really get a lot of face time with people. They're just out of the ordinary. It's not stuff that everybody really necessarily knows about. I've actually had several people say, I've had to look up what that is so that I could see it, which is kind of why I keep it the way that I do with the legends and stuff. They're published through blackrosewriting.com. You can even order them from Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, booksmillion.com, all those places. And the third one is almost done and almost ready to go to the publisher for editing. So looking forward to getting the trilogy completed.
Well, I have a couple. There's Nuki Kubai, book 1 of the Chronicles of Frank Andrews. And it's basically a modern day wizard hunting ghosties and ghoulies through the Golden Horseshoe of area of Ontario. And Anuki Kubai is feasting on the people of the Golden Horseshoe, and Ray figures he has to stop it. And book 2, Revenants of that series, is currently in edit with Dark Dragon Publishing. And book 3, Lifricant, is in edit with Dark Dragon Publishing, lagging a little bit more behind book 2. There's Worlds Apart, which is a paranormal action adventure with a lot of romance. Don't let the cover skew you too much. Where a wizard from an alternative Earth that is dying from a blight that is creeping over and slowly destroying it journeys to our world in a bid to find a cure for his own. Here he meets Alcina, a Wiccan priestess who is involved in a custody battle against her ex-boyfriend, the father of her child, who vanished 7 years before while she was pregnant. Her ex-boyfriend is a member of a fanatic religious cult who is not above doing an old-fashioned witch burning if they don't get their way, and Alcina happens to be wicked. Then I have my more ordinary fantasy, which is Horn of the Kraken, which is a Norse fantasy Viking adventure where the pretender to the throne of the North, Hakon, who has the backing of the Roman Church, has obtained the Horn of the Kraken, which he is using to sink the ships of the rightful heir, Jarl Eric Bloodaxe. And Jarl Eric sends a group of heroes to infiltrate Hakon's compound and steal the horn. And it traces their adventures. So that's my fantasy shots.
And I absolutely loved hosting Sigerlina on my blog as part of the Heroes and Heroines blog hop. My son saw that the other day and he's like, "Oh my gosh, Mom, is that like a D&D thing?" I was like, "Nope, it's even better. You need to go and read this stuff." But he's really into D&D and he saw the character sheets and he was like, "Is this a new D&D thing?" I was like, "Nope, it's even better."
Yeah. I'll tell you, I will plug Fate of the Norns because it is the most fantastic gaming system I've ever come across. It's focused on skill and logic, not so much on luck, because you remove the dice.
Mm-hmm.
And if you pick up the core rulebook, it's like a primer on Norse culture and Norse mythology in the 900s. Andrew, it's his baby. He's worked on it for over 20 years, and he's created an incredible system. And in writing awesome in that world, I had to do a lot of research to try to keep it true to not necessarily Norse history, but Norse culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, really a good game and a great book. I gotta say, great book.
Yeah, it looks great. I mean, it's on. I'm not allowed to buy any books for a hot minute because I bought so many books at the 12 Days of Indies, and so I'm not allowed to. My new rule is I'm not allowed to have not read at least 80% of my books before I buy more books, and I'm currently at like 72%. But I've been adding a lot of stuff, and I get to sneak around it by buying books for my boys for birthdays and for holidays. And that one is definitely on the list for the next birthday coming up. So excited. But all right. Tell everybody any other events that you guys are participating in with LitCon that you want to go ahead and plug real quick. Let them know where we can find you at LitCon. And we can start with Rebecca.
Let me pull up my list here. I'm doing another panel, another urban fantasy panel, Tropes and Why We Love Them, later this afternoon, 4 p.m. And there's one tomorrow, the 7th at 2 p.m. And again, another urban fantasy panel. What's next for urban fantasy? So those are the other two that I'm going to be doing. And I did one last night, which was super, super fun. I enjoyed